Hello, and welcome, my beloved soul sisters. Thank you for joining me here today on the Heart of the Soul podcast. My name is Amana, and I am so happy that you're here. This is a space where we explore what it means to be wild women walking upon this earth. We connect through the ancient ritual of storytelling, sharing about that which is often unseen and unspoken. It's my hope that soaking in these stories inspire you to harness your own innate knowing and center you into a more embodied and alive version of your beautiful, unique self. Today is Wednesday, March 13th, 2025. Our moon is currently waxing towards a full moon in Virgo tomorrow, a blood moon with a total lunar eclipse. Eclipses are great for releasing and letting go. For my in-person community full moon gathering that I will be facilitating this weekend, we're going to be honoring, loving, healing, and releasing a younger version of ourselves that has been holding shame, sadness, anger, or something else that each woman would like to heal and move forward from. And today I am going to be recording this. It's going to be a solo episode of me. I'm playing with the title of Confessions of a Birth Worker. So what you can expect in this episode is me talking a little bit more in depth about birth attendance. Now I like to call myself a soul midwife. As I midwife the souls coming in and going out, I am both a true birth companion, birth soul midwife, and also a death walker. A birth walker, a death walker might be better terms to identify what I do, but I also walk alongside people as they're nearing the end of their lives. And of course, my phone is ringing now, but that's okay. I'm just gonna let it buzz over there. You might hear it. I'm a death walker and celebrant. And of course, these two things go hand in hand, like one defines another. Like if you were to try to define what makes something alive, you would also have to define what makes something dead. And birthing and deathing are things that we all experience as humans, and they affect us because it also happens in the natural world around us and with the other humans that we love. So for me, my journey and obsession, and I do have some little notes. I'll just tell you that I have some notes that I'm going to try and kind of riff off of. Of course, I'm going to speak more. These are just little bullets to help me remember what I want to share. But I started being obsessed with babies really from the time that I was one. I had the joy of having a next door neighbor who was 15 months younger than me, and I just loved, adored her, mothered her. I've even seen like videos of myself when I was little, overbearing, trying to mother her. There's photos of me like feeding her in her high chair when I'm just a little bit older than she is. And the obsession and interest and curiosity for babies just grew over time. Whenever babies were around, I loved to change even the messy things. I loved changing the diapers. When my mom took me to the pediatrician's office, I would take the parenting magazines and read about care for babies and children and what was developmentally normal at different times. And that never shifted and changed. It just, that curiosity and wanting to know just grew over time. My mom, I was lucky enough to have a mom who was an elementary school librarian. So she, of course, has a huge love for books and gave to me and read to me books like these two that I'm going to show you here. This one's called A Midwife's Apprentice by Karen Cushman. And it talks about this young girl who becomes a midwife apprentice and what that looks like and unfolds. And then this beautiful book called The Boarding Room. I recently reread both of these books and was reminded of things that I didn't know before or that I had forgotten about. I mean, And so in this book, The Boarding Room, they talk about the tradition of having a room in the house called the boarding room that's off of like the kitchen and main living area and that has a window. So here, this is the boarding room where they have both birth and death is occurring. So this is the room where women would go to birth their babies. And this was also the room where they brought people when they were sick or dying. And this reminds me that birth and death, just a few hundred years ago, almost always happened inside our homes. Now, where I'm living in the United States, and it has been this way for the last many years, the most recent statistic is that about 98% of babies are born in hospitals. So it's, if maybe you're in the home birth community and it feels like there's a lot more happening, but really statistically, only 2% of babies are born outside of the hospital. And some of those are even accidental and unplanned. So yes, my mother nourished my curiosity and she helped me to cultivate learning and knowledge. And as soon as I was able to start babysitting, I babysat from a very, I think I was 10 or younger when I started babysitting. I know that when I was 10 years old, I babysat for our next door neighbor who had 3 kids under 3. And at that time, I just thought it was the best thing ever. It was so fun for me. I was drawn to babes, drawn to children, loved interacting with them, loved their energy, loved learning about the different stages and also witnessing and watching other women and men parent. So watching mothers mothering, witnessing breastfeeding. It's so important for us to be able to witness these things so that we can gain more insight and knowledge by being near them and watching. And I also then began having these regular babysitting jobs where I babysat a little boy and girl down the street on a regular basis, 2 days a week for a couple hours after school. And I feel bad about this now, but I being with babies so much. So it was an older boy and a younger girl. And sometimes the baby would be napping when I got there, this toddler. And I wanted to be with her so much. I didn't want these hours to pass and me not to be with her. So sometimes I would wake her up. Sorry, baby. Sorry, mama. But that is something that I used to do because I loved them so much. And this just continued to grow. And yet I also, for me, I didn't want to, there was this resistance to midwifery in a way. I did at one time, I was offered a midwifery apprenticeship with a local midwife and I considered it, but I chose against it. There was something in me at that time where I felt like I didn't want to be a midwife until I had become a mother myself. Like I had attended births with midwives since then who hadn't given birth and also midwives that have. And I feel like there's a different sort of palpable energy. And although some women choose midwives who have never birthed themselves and they're totally fine with it and super happy with their care and it's excellent and wonderful, for me, there was something that I didn't want to be in that position unless I had already given birth myself. So where am I going with this? I chose against that apprenticeship. I actually decided to go into nursing school. I grew up in a very medicalized family and my dad wanted me to go to medical school. He wanted me to become a physician. And I knew I didn't want to be a physician. I knew I was a caretaker, that I wanted to tend to people. I knew from experiences I'd had in life that in the hospitals, the real true care comes from the nurses and the nursing assistants. And I was a nursing assistant for a number of years and then went into nursing school. I eventually moved to Wenatchee, Washington, which is like in the middle of Washington. And one of the first things I noticed when I moved to that town as I was finishing nursing school there was that there was this midwifery practice. And I saw the building and it was like this, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to find a way to be a birth assistant with these midwives. And I felt comfortable in that role and wanted to be in that role attending births. And so as fate would have it, one of my fellow nursing students was a birth assistant with this practice of midwives. So it was a group practice of 3 midwives at the time, but I wound up working with 4, maybe even 5 midwives that were like in and out of the practice, and student midwives and things like that. And they did home birth, and then they had this birth center where they had 2 birthing rooms and they had births there as well. So I was able to become a birth assistant with them, and remember being like so excited for that first call and first birth to witness. And I remember it. So I also can recall imagining at the time that I would remember in detail every single birth I might ever see in my life. I, of course, had watched many, many videos of birth, listened to birth stories, read birth stories, like had lots of birth books already, but had never actually witnessed a baby emerge from their mother. And so the very first birth I ever witnessed was at the birth center in this town. I remember getting there before the mom, and then the mom arrives and she's getting out of her car she's deep in it. And she had this long skirt on. I remember she got up onto the bed in all fours, like before like anything else happened. It was just like her arriving, walking into the birthing suite, getting onto bed in all fours, all of her clothing still on, but lifting her skirt up. And this baby began to emerge from her right then. First, his little head came out, and just his head was out. And before he even had fully emerged, before his body was born, he began to cry. It was amazing. And then on the next contraction, this mama birthed her son the rest of the way into the room, and someone helped him to the bed, although I believe that that's not necessary. And then as the mom turned over and the midwife, handed the baby to the mama, the baby started peeing. So it was just like this baby was showing us all the things right from the beginning. And this was like the first birth experience I got to witness and be with that was very non-medical in that way. Like, even though it was happening with medical providers, because of the circumstances and how quickly this baby emerged, there was no medical intervention. And I love that because it just set this foundation for this to be a normal, natural way of birth. I also am remembering to back up now. And if you haven't heard me share about my mother's birth story, so both my grandmother, she birthed her first 2 babies unintentionally unassisted. Her son, my grandmother's first child, so my grandma, her name is Elsie, she birthed him in a car on a road trip when they were not expecting him to come. And then, because that birth had happened, they were urged to move and stay with family members that were closer to the hospital. And so they did that when she was pregnant with my mom. And again, she went into labor for this birth, from my mother's birth, in the middle of the night. And as my grandpa was putting on his pants, my grandmother Elsie birthed my mother right there inside on these wooden steps that I had the honor of going back and witnessing and seeing years later. And she was fine. My mom was fine. And what I actually didn't know until recently, that my mom didn't even know about herself, was that my mother was born in caul in the amniotic sac. And I only found this out this last spring because I was sitting there with my mom and her cousin, and me being who I am, I always bring up birth. And somehow we got talking. Oh, because I was in town to be attending a birth not far from where my mom lives. And my mom's cousin said something about her being born in Call. And my mom said, what? Like, and that, so her cousin's dad had like heard that story. And yet somehow my mom hadn't heard that story. And so I just find it so beautiful that my own mom was born unintentionally, unassisted from her mother. And also, I got to hear a few stories where my grandmother was then called to the births of other women, including a woman that lived next door to her at a time that she, in her belief system, was choosing to have a birth at home without medical providers as well. And near the end, the husband felt like he needed support. She needed support. And so she ran over and grabbed my grandma, and my grandma went over there, and she was there as the baby emerged. And my grandma said at that time, what she thought she was supposed to do was like hold them up and spank them. So she did that. But that is not necessary. That's something that actually a practice that began after women were given drugs in labor, because when a woman is given drugs in labor, the baby is also given those drugs. So babies were born a lot less alert. And so they were doing these things to stimulate them into their bodies because they were sedated by medication. So, other stories. Some of these I've never shared before. Some of them because it just wasn't right in timing, and some because I've had shame about being a part of some of these more medicalized births and the roles that I played within them, even as a birth assistant. Sorry, I keep knocking things here. So I would like to share that I don't know how many birds I saw. Often I was there for about 4 years, and it was multiple birds a month that I would attend. Sometimes it was multiple birds in a week, sometimes more than one birth in a day. And I just couldn't get enough. It was such a wonderful experience to be able to witness all these different births outside of the hospital. I always knew, even when I was in nursing school, because people knew I loved birth, they'd be like, aren't you, so you're going to be like an OBGYN nurse, and you're going to be a labor and delivery nurse. And I was like, actually, no, because for me, I believe that birth is not meant for the hospital in 98% of the time. That it's great that it's there for when we might need it. But I believe that 98% of births should be happening at home, not the other way around. So I knew I didn't want to attend births in the hospital. I knew that abuse and violence was happening to babies and women in the hospital from stories I'd heard women tell, and also from video footage I'd seen, statistics about the trauma that women experience in the hospital. I knew that that was not for me, and that I didn't want to support that and be witness to that. I knew that I, in a role of nurse or doula, would not really be able to help women in the hospital, especially if I was an employee of the hospital and anyway, could go down a whole rabbit hole about that. I was open to going if birth started outside of the hospital and a woman was transferring to the hospital. Of course, I'm not going to abandon the woman. I go with the woman to the hospital, and I advocate for that woman the best that I possibly can. But once you're within the system, there's many things that, already birth is something we cannot control. And it's just to the next level. So I did experience only one transfer to the hospital with that midwifery practice. And I remember this sweet mama. It was actually a woman that I had worked with for a time. And in labor, it's so interesting. I've been to so many births, and every midwife is a little different. And of course, how they are with each birthing mother is a little different. But this birthing mother, when I arrived, the midwife was there, the husband was there, but they were just like chatting off in the kitchen. And the woman was there in the birthing tub, like in this birthing realm, but also really looking for outside witnessing and holding and tending. So I remember getting right down there on the ground and just looking at her and breathing with her, toning with her, and just being present with her. And although I didn't know how she felt about this midwife and that people weren't really, I remember even in her birthing realm, she took a moment between a contraction. She looked me deep in the eyes and just, I'm getting tearful right now, just thanking me, because I could feel and see that she was pretty much being ignored when the woman who is birthing, like, should be the center. I mean, this is a woman bringing new life. This is the most open, vulnerable we become as women in labor and birth. And at one point, as the woman was beginning to push, there were some decels in the baby's heart rate. And from my perspective, the midwife let fear kind of ride that. And she said that they had to transfer to the hospital. And so we did. We transferred to the hospital, and just the hospital was just minutes away. And just minutes after we arrived, this mother pushed her baby out just fine. And I remember even the midwife saying, like, she said something like, if I had known you were that good of a pusher, we would have just stayed home and had your baby. And anyway, it's upsetting and interesting to me. Like, this mother wasn't feeling like she needed to go to the hospital, but the midwife was saying that she needed to go to the hospital. And this is why I feel, yes, it's important. Yes, I understand why women choose medical midwives and people that have experience with birth, but there's been like this step away from women becoming in tune with their own bodies and remembering that they can tune into their own abilities, and that they should be asked the question and given the opportunity to decide, even if in some ways that's not really possible because women are in like this la la land of birth and not in the cortex of decision making. So that was the one transfer that I attended there. And I've only attended one other transfer to the hospital that I'm going to address a little bit later that has some of those shame stories in it. And also be advocating and standing up. So in the best that I could, but still feel a lot of guilt about what I couldn't protect this woman from. So in this practice of midwifery, I also there was just so many women that birthed in this community that it was so wonderful to see the variety of women birth. Like, I remember there was this one woman who, she was differently abled, and she actually wasn't able to like verbally express that she was in labor. Like, she denied that she was in labor, even though to us on the outside it was happening. And it was so interesting to witness the way she moved through labor differently than a lot of women, as we're, like analyzing it in a different way. And yet she still just, birthed her baby, and the baby came and she birthed this little one. I also remember witnessing the first silent birth that I ever witnessed. This woman was in this, big birthing tub in the birthing center, and she was just totally silent. This is another thing so as a birth assistant, some people don't know this or the difference. So a birth assistant is someone that's hired by a midwife, that I get paid by the midwife to be there and be present and help with. I would, take vital signs, and I would clean up the space afterwards. I would help with documentation, because I was also in nursing school, I could administer medications if prescribed by the midwife, and start IVs and help with resuscitation if it was needed. Like having neonatal resuscitation certification was one of the requirements to be a birth assistant. Excuse me. And so, but let's circle back. So I often, most of the time, would not meet the woman until she was like in the middle of labor, right? And so that was really interesting experience as well, because I would meet these women when they were off in birthland. And then after they birthed their babies, I would, they had this different electric, they're all high on the birth hormones, and would see them then, and then would see them later after they gave birth, sometimes like days after when they were coming back in for visits with the midwife. But this one woman, I just remember this was the first silent birth. She had her headphones on. She was just in the tub. I was there for a few hours and never heard her make a sound. And as the baby emerged, also no sound came from this mama, and this baby just came out of her in the bathtub, and she brought this baby to her chest. And it was only after the baby was born that I heard the first words come out of her mouth. I experienced other coping styles and ways that women moved with their labors. I remember, some women screaming out, calling out. It was very common for women to near the end or near transition, one might say, when they're moving from into the pushing stage. A lot of women, I would say over 60% of women at some point would say, I can't do this. And then 100% of them went on to do it and birth their baby. I know some of the younger women, it's so interesting to watch them labor and walk and stand in contractions and tense, and then other people that relaxed into the sensations. Some women that clung to their men, clung to their mothers, didn't want to be touched. Like there's so many different ways that women birth. I mean, just as unique as the women that we are. And I also witnessed an episiotomy. I've only witnessed one episiotomy ever. And it was in the birth center. And I remember this young woman, and she had been pushing for quite a long time. And there was dialogue about it. And she had quite a long perineum. But I still remember when the midwife spoke to her about it, and although she agreed to it, it was still an alarming thing to witness for me, to see there's just these big scissors just going right there, like on the top of the baby, like the baby's head is right there. And then the scissors and cutting right there. And the baby did come out after, but sometimes I still wonder what might have happened if that midwife had allowed more time for that baby to emerge. Like, would that woman have opened, or maybe she would have torn? But research shows that tears actually approximate and heal better than cuts that we do, artificial cuts that we make. So within this role of birth assistant, like I said, I was also in nursing school, so I had nursing skills that then some of the midwives would choose to have me do different things because I had the certificate, or I had the licensure to do that. I never actually witnessed a resuscitation, just wanted to touch on that, although I had the skills to assist with a resuscitation. So I've taken resuscitation from many different, I got certified multiple times. Most of the time it was with hospital, but the last 2 times I got resuscitated with Karen Strange. Look her up. She is a little strange, but she's also the only one that I know that teaches neonatal resuscitation in a way that's like expected that you're going to be at home. And so I really appreciated this training as a different way. And she spoke about the importance of like skin to skin, right? And like not the silicone bag that, of course, in some ways that is, of course, it's hygienic and things, but in my perspective, honestly, if I were ever to happenstance be present for a birth and a baby wasn't breathing right away, first there would be the allowance for that baby to come into their body and breathe. And if I felt or the mother felt like that baby needed some assistance, I would encourage the mother to breathe life into her baby. I think having some silicone bag technology is not an ideal way to bring your baby into their body and to give them breath and life. So what I did, so I don't know about you, but I definitely grew up and was conditioned into the good girl archetype and not ruffling feathers, not speaking up. And I definitely carried that into the good employee. And I remember this midwife saying that this birthing woman had a previous bleed after birth and that she had agreed to have a shot in her leg of Pitocin after she birthed the baby. But I didn't actually ever talk to this woman. And what the midwife had instructed me to do was to have the medication already drawn up, and that after the baby was born, one of my jobs was to quickly get the Pitocin and shoot it into this woman's leg without asking her or saying anything. And she said that this is what the woman wanted. But as soon as I did it and after I did it and reflecting back, I mean, I feel so like I wonder sometimes about these women that I was at their births, and do they in their birth story say, yeah, and then this woman shoved Pitocin, shot me with Pitocin in my leg without consent or warning? I wouldn't be surprised if this woman remembers this and shares this in her story. And I have never done it again and will never do that again. And it was absolutely a learning experience for me to administer this medication to this woman in her vulnerable state right after she'd given birth without consent. So I did also, after I became a nurse and was working as a nurse in this area, continued to be a birth assistant because I just feel called to birth. Birth is absolutely a life calling. It's not an easy, it's not easy. You know, you have to your own self reckon with birth and death and know that both are on the table at all times. I mean, which is true every day, but it's magnified in the birth world. And you also have to be on call. And being on call is not easy. I hate sleeping with my phone, the ringer on, but that's what I had to do. And also to just be mindful. Like when I lived in that area, I would go rock climbing and hiking, and I couldn't go on certain hikes, on lots of hikes, or I couldn't be so far because I needed to be able to get to the birth within a certain amount of time. So the last birth that I witnessed in Wenatchee was that of a dear friend of mine. Just days before I got married, I had moved away and actually had already come back for one other birth. But then a few days before our wedding, one of my dear friends, Jessie, we share the story on a different episode of the podcast, J-Ma, that she birthed her son, and I got to witness her. And it was also with this practice of midwives and at the birth center. And that was also beautiful and wonderful. And so then I moved to another place, to Spokane, a little further east in Washington. And that's when my experience with my own pregnancies and births began, after I had witnessed many births. My first pregnancy ended in a 6-week loss, and then my next pregnancy was hard. It was Hartley's pregnancy. If you want to hear her story, you can go back to that episode where I share about her pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, her death, her grief, my grief experience with her, which is, of course, ongoing. Grief is there when love is there. So I attended this doula training. I had never attended a doula training, although I could have taught it myself. I didn't like, it wasn't something I needed, but just an experience that I wanted to have. So I did that when I was pregnant with Hartley. And then, if you don't know, in short, when I was 6 months pregnant, I found out that this little baby that I could feel moving inside of me did not have kidneys, and that she would not survive after being born. And for me, I chose to carry her, and I birthed her at home. She was actually breech, and birthed her little bum first with a midwife named Tammy. And after her birth, I began attending births with Tammy as a birth assistant, which was definitely, it was a little more of a heartache when I was attending births between Hartley's birth, after birthing my own baby that didn't live, to then birthing my son, who is now 8 years old. So I loved, this was a different experience. So in Wenatchee, I was with a practice of midwives that, changed who was on call, and they had students working with them. And so I got to witness, I think, 5 different midwives in the way that they attended births, because each one was a little different, especially with that energy right after baby was born. I remember some of them were like calm and had like a nice energy, and then other ones would be like, speak to your baby, talk to your baby, speak to your baby, like trying to get the baby to cry and, whatever right away, that they didn't allow for the natural transition time where their lungs go from liquid to air, to oxygenated. So, to breathing oxygen, which I think was, for me, it was a great thing to be able to witness so many midwives. And I was excited to work with Tammy because she was a single practice midwife. So I always knew it was going to be with her. And she has the birth. She was a medical midwife. She's not practicing anymore, but she attended births in a way that was most aligned with me at that time, and that she was very low intervention and very open to mother-led births and following the mother's desire. I did get to witness a face presentation, which is super rare. I should have looked it up to tell you the percentage, but it's super rare where, babies, normally the top of their head is what's emerging first, right? Of course, sometimes it's bum, sometimes it's feet in breech births, but this baby's face was the first thing coming out. So their neck was, stretched out like this, and the face was coming out first. And that's like a wider, more awkward area. And I remember when she realized that it was the baby's face coming, and yet they could still, of course, this baby could still be born, and was still born at home, but just took a little bit more time. So that's the only one I could think of at this moment that is sticking out. But just there's birth is so, it's the same, it's exactly the same, and it's completely unique each time, each mom, each baby. And so now I want to tell you about attending a birth with another midwife that I had never met, and the non-consensual abuse that I witnessed. So I was asked to attend a home birth of one of my friend's sister-in-laws with a midwife that, like I said, I was not familiar with, had never met her. And I get there, and reflectively, I wish I had communicated had the capacity to. I was, I had 2 young kids at the time. I didn't really have the capacity to meet with her more before her baby was born about the type of birth she wanted, what she did, what she didn't want. So although I'd met her before, we hadn't talked that much about her birth. And I get there, and this midwife, from the moment I walked in, her energy was prickly, I would say. And I witnessed her breaking this woman's water without consent. She did not ask consent, and she did it. I also remember her telling the woman to push when the woman was not feeling any sort of sensation to push. She wasn't, fully ready. And it was because there was this other woman in labor, and she was trying to hurry her along and telling her to just birth the baby. When this woman was laboring and on the bed, and she was refusing ice chips, the midwife said, offer her some ice chips. And I offered her the ice chips. She didn't want them. The midwife says to me, just put them in her mouth. And I said, no. At this time, I had found a little more of my own authority, especially and within the birthing space, that just because a midwife is telling me to do something does not mean I'm going to do it, especially when I'm not her employee, right? I'm here as a support person to this woman. And then later, the woman was in the tub and laboring, and the midwife asked to do a cervical exam, and the woman agrees to the cervical exam, but then the woman, puts her hand inside, and then the laboring woman starts to have a contraction, which most of the time, there are still sometimes where the midwife wants to have their hand inside during a contraction. Again, you can give birth without any cervical exam. Cervical exams statistically are not helpful and are unnecessary. And I remember she had her hand in there, and this woman was saying, stop, like get, I remember exact words, but like, stop, get out. And she was like trying to retract as far as she could, but she was in the bath, and this woman just kept her hand in there. And after the woman said stop and the midwife was not responding, she said stop to that midwife. And then the woman removed her hand. And I was just like, ew, this is so gross. Like, that is not okay. If that had been like a man with his penis inside of her and the woman was saying, get out, stop, like, that is rape. That is also rape with your hand. Okay. That's not okay. And eventually, I'm not surprised this woman feeling unsafe with this midwife, and this midwife all on this like time schedule because she had some other woman in labor, decided that she wanted to go to the hospital. So I agreed to drive this woman and her husband to the hospital. I drove her there while she was obviously in labor. And this was in COVID times, and the staff didn't want to allow me in as their quote unquote doula because I didn't have, I wasn't like a certified doula, which I intentionally did not certify because it puts you into this box of what you are allowed to do and aren't allowed to do. And certified doulas are not allowed to advocate for their patients. A lot of women have a misconception about this, but it's actually like written in the certification that you cannot advocate for your woman, for the woman that you're caring for. She has to do it for herself, which is nearly impossible when you're in labor. But because the husband had a seizure disorder, they did allow me in. I remember walking in there and reminding the staff that this woman was planning a home birth. So they need to ask before every intervention to ask. And the baby was born, not long after. This mother birthed her son. And I remember the mom had asked for she wanted videos and pictures. And like all hospitals that I know, I was actually trying to find I've tried to search for hospital births, but I have never been able to find, and maybe you can send me them if you can, but there's a hospital policy, which is not a law. Policies and laws are different, but hospitals will have a policy in place that people are not allowed to film the emergence of the baby. You can film after, unless they're doing a resuscitation, then you cannot. You can film the mom before, but you cannot film the emergence because so often they fuck it up, and they are fucking it up as they're doing it. And that's why they don't allow anyone to film the emergence, because, and even like the time right after, because if I I don't know. I feel that if more people saw the abuse that was happening to these babies as they're emerging, the touch, the very first touch that they're feeling is this gloved fake hand, and from a person that doesn't even know them. The first touch that a baby should be feeling is the flesh of their mom. You know, maybe it's the mom reaching down and providing that protection of her perineum. But okay, so I remember I was trying to film and the hospital staff's telling me, like, you can't, and not in a nice way either. They can't communicate in a nice way. They could have just said, you know, it's against our policy, you can't film. But she snapped at me, so I stopped. But then I did film after the baby was born, which was okay. But even seeing that and the way that they aggressively, all these, it was women, except for the male OBGYN, all they call it stimulating the baby, but it's aggressive, and they're literally trying to cause pain so that the baby will cry out. And a lot of people don't know this, and shoving things down the baby's throat that aren't necessary. So after baby's born and things settle down, I remember, you know, people had kind of left the room and they had started an IV on her, and she thought she just had IV fluids. And then I look up and there's a bag of Pitocin that is dripping, and they are, without consent, administering Pitocin to this woman after she gave birth. After I specifically said, you need to ask for consent. And of course, she didn't know what was happening. How was she supposed to know what was happening? They didn't ask her, they didn't tell her. And it's not something they gave her a pill to take, or they weren't giving her a shot. It was just going in that IV that was already running, so they could just slip it in on the sly. And Pitocin messes with your hormones. And if you receive Pitocin with pregnancy and birth, you have a way higher chance of postpartum depression. And so I went out and to the nursing station. Well, first I pressed the call light, nobody came. I went to the nursing station, like, you are administering this medication without consent, come turn it off. And they all acted all bothered and whatever, but they came and they turned it off. So I didn't know I was going to get so heated in this, but after that time, I began being present with women as they birth their babies as a sole midwife, being present with women who choose to birth without licensed medical providers, women who want to birth on their own, allowing for mother-led laboring and birth. This gives, and of course, I believe women should birth with who they want and where they feel safe. And that I can't make that decision. Each mother has to make her own decision for her baby. And of course, that can change in the birth. Like this woman who was feeling unsafe at home. In hindsight, I wish we could have just kicked the midwife out, but that's not what happened. And we went to the hospital and she birthed her baby. In the mother-led births that I've witnessed, these mothers have the opportunity to protect their own perineum if they choose. Of course, if a woman asks for me to press on her perineum, I will. But I also attended births with midwives who told me to do that and didn't give the woman a choice. And reflectively, it feels to touch someone in their most tender place while they're birthing without permission. I just would never do that again, but I did do it. And so women can protect their own perineum if they choose. I have witnessed mamas unwrap the umbilical cord from their baby twice around their neck by themselves you don't need training to do that. They often don't need assistance. Mothers can assess their newborns. It's innate. It's born within us. Babies most of the time don't need to be caught. If they're birthing onto a bed or they're on their hands and knees, I've only once witnessed a birth with a woman that was standing where she thought she was going to catch her baby and then she didn't, and the baby fell to the earth. She was outside in this birth and the baby was still fine. although she didn't catch her baby. So yes, so this is a bit about my experience of being a birth keeper, a soul midwife, a birth assistant. I've had on these many different hats in the role of the birth realm, but I will never attend a birth again as a medical provider. Several years ago now, I let my nursing license expire. I don't keep up like neonatal resuscitation certification. My philosophy and the way that I walk with women in pregnancy, birth, and motherhood continues to evolve. But I know that attending births as a medical provider is something I will never do again. And I was never actually the provider, just an assistant, like I said. And I'm currently, after being on call for over 15 years, I decided this year, I started in 2024, but taking a break from attending births. Because being on call and having to plan vacations and life and making sure that, like, if my husband is on deployment for work, that I have someone else that can drop whatever they're doing at the drop of a hat to care for my kids. And I needed this year to be more easeful, more time for other things. I still continue to mentor and walk alongside women in their journeys of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. But I no longer attend the births, or at this time, I'm not being present for the births and not being on call. And that is feeling really good to me now for this time. And I have no question that birth is going to continue to call me. Birth continues to call me the way death continues to call me to be the shamana that I am. I love there's different types of witch, and I'm a shamana, which is great because my name's Amana, shamana, and I'm a birth walker and a death walker, and I'm going to continue throughout my life to be called to these places, to these times, to these people as they're walking these paths. And I have no doubt that's going to continue. And my children right now are 8 and almost 5. And I just can't believe they're already this big. And I want to continue to soak them in at this age and know that right now I'm 42 and I have years ahead of me that I can be on call and miss my children's birthdays sometimes and miss other things to serve this altar that I feel called to serve, which is birth and death. So I think that might be all I have to say now. So if you're curious and want to know more, you can take a look at my website and see what I have to offer. If my offerings that are written there don't feel aligned with what you feel like you need, you're welcome to reach out and tell me specifically what sort of support and birth walker or death walker service you're hoping to receive from me, and we can chat about it. And yeah, I do provide grief care as well, because for me, that was really so important for me, and grief and death have also been huge teachers in my life. If you're not following me on Instagram, I'm on there now, newly as of a few months ago. So I'm growing and learning in that platform. You can also follow along on YouTube. I'm currently doing a 100-day countdown, a remembering ritual, looking back at the first 100 episodes of this podcast, as the 100th episode is going to be published in May. I hope you're all having a beautiful day whenever you listen to this, and would love to hear any reflections, or if you have any questions about the work that I do, or about birth or death or grief, pregnancy, mothering. I welcome your questions and would love to hear. I would also so appreciate if you enjoy this podcast, If you would leave a rating or review on whatever platform you're listening, and share the show with someone you want. If you have an abundance and want to donate to me, to the show through my Venmo or PayPal, you're also welcome to do that. And thanks again for listening. And I look forward to continuing to produce these episodes for you. Mwah! Love, love, love.